Now we will have the other Bob Young come on stage. When this Bob Young first floated his company on the public exchanges, he was doing $16 million in sales. The stock went out at $7. It then had a little run to about $132 a share. Bob was a billionaire. Now he's just a zillionaire, because at $132 million in revenue, which is where Red Hat is today, the stock is back at $5. And he's still smiling. He's still a happy man. He's still a remarkable man. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know about you guys. Oh, by the way, who controls the lights here? Can you raise the lights on the audience? Turn it. Oh, good. For two reasons. One is I find it difficult talking to people I can't see. The other is I do ramble and I bore people, and so if you want to go back to reading your newspapers, that's okay. I don't know about you guys. The person I'm most impressed with here is Moses, for putting together a team who, assembled. I'm a little intimidated. I knew nothing about the conference. I've been hanging out today just to find out, what the competition is like in the way of speakers. And we have Nobel laureates, and we have musicians who, well, I mean, I've got a tin ear, and when you have musicians who can, choke up a guy with a tin ear, these are just remarkable human beings. And I couldn't figure out, while I was waiting around today and listening to these talks, how I got invited to this thing, And I've been stewing on that when I realized finally, the penny dropped that anyone can make a mistake. Anyway, I'm going to talk to you about a couple of things. I'm going to give you a little overview of actually what Red Hat is about, why this open source movement, this change in the software industry that Red Hat represents is actually not just important to the software industry, it's actually important to everyone in our society. It's a very interesting group, actually, that I was asked to, this section of the talks, because we're all sort of speaking on a theme which actually relates to freedom. Very different angles on it, though. But then from that, I'm going to extrapolate to actually what I currently really care about, which is, in fact, the even bigger issues around intellectual property and the concepts of intellectual property that we as members of a free society, well, except for marijuana, a mostly free society, except for our courthouses, except for our... Anyway, as Winston Churchill says, when you listen to everyone up here making extremely valid points, you just, all you can do is think back to Churchill's line. It's the only thing that keeps me going, which his line was when he was faced with critics of the democratic, free market systems who were saying, look at all this terrible stuff that's going on. He'd say, well, you're right. Free market democracies are really a pretty awful way to organize human behavior until you consider all the others. And, that's the thing that keeps you going. But, okay, so it's actually a great pleasure to be here and talking to you, because at Red Hat, I speak to very technically oriented people. What Red Hat builds is a server operating system. These are the Unix operating systems that power the internet. They power the huge databases that crunch your bank account numbers. And this is, very sophisticated technology. And so I'm typically talking to audiences of extremely sort of capable technicians. I mean, these guys. They've all got long hair and Birkenstock shoes, and their idea of dressing up is to put on a clean T-shirt. You've all have these guys working away in your back rooms of your office, and they've all got IQs of 2 or 3 times mine, and which is why it's nice to talk to you guys today. But anyways, what Red Hat was about, and we only have 15 minutes here, so I've got to give you the shortened version, and I've been accused of turning these things into 3-hour seminars. So what Red Hat is about is we build a Linux-based operating system. Linux is a 16-megabyte kernel of an operating system. Our operating system is 800 megabytes big. We perform the function in this open source world of a car company. There are millions of different teams. There's the Apache web server team, there's the X-Window team. It's a little bit like the auto industry where Ford buys tires from Michelin or Firestone, was it? Anyways, they buy tires from one supplier and airbags from another supplier and engines from a third, and they assemble them into a useful product. In effect, the way to think of it is there's no such thing as a car. None of you drove here today in a car. You drove in a Ford Taurus, or you drove in a Honda Accord. A car is a description of the collection of products. You could, in fact, build your own car in your garage. You could go to AutoZone and buy all the pieces and assemble your own car. And there are people, the stock car racers, who effectively do that. But Ford turns all of that technology coming out of the auto industry into a useful product. And that is exactly the parallel of what Red Hat does in the open source community. We work with all the other teams around the world who produce the components that we engineer into useful products for our customers, and then we give it away. We don't just give it away for free on the internet. We give it away in such a way that you can download it off the internet, put it on CD-ROM, and go into competition with us without so much as asking our permission. But it's not only free as in free beer. More importantly, what we do is we ship it with complete source code, and I'll explain that in 1 second, and we ship it with a license that allows you to do whatever you need to do with that source code. Now, for those of you who haven't paid attention to the computer industry, first thing you do is go down to Ryerson and sign up, because this is important stuff. Software comes in two formats. Comes in source code, which is the stuff that the programmers work with. The if-then statements, the go-to statements, if open bracket A equals close bracket B kind of stuff. It's then run through a compiler and turned into binaries. Binaries are the ones and zeros that your computer hardware can understand. And the software industry, as it has been built up over the last 30 years, has been based on this really bizarre, flawed model where all the supplier gives you are the binaries. So you don't get the source code. You have no way of making changes. So you build your organization around this technology that you can't improve. If it crashes, well, it crashed. Yeah, it's like a mystery. But worse than that, even if you could figure out how to fix it, and if you don't believe me, just read any of these shrink-wrap licenses with any of the software you bought. Comes with a license that basically says, if you make any changes to the product that you're building your organization around, or we as a society now are building our society around, if you make any changes to it, if you fix a bug that has been causing your machines to crash, or you add a feature that your thousands of users or customers desperately need, the vendor can have you thrown into jail for so much as touching the technology. And at Red Hat, we get a lot of credit for actually trying to address this problem. And we're addressing the problem simply because, I got into the software business. I had been in the computer hardware business. I knew nothing about the software business, and all I knew was the amount of frustration all the guys I was selling hardware to had with software. And when I first became aware of this open source movement, free software movement in the early 90s, no one could figure out how to make a living at it. No one really understood the economics of it, but we all understood where the enthusiasm of the programmers came from. Because, unlike you or me, programmers look at this technology, at the source code, and they look at the open source model of doing things, where we give the programmers, our users of the technology, we give them the source code, and we give them a license that allows them to do what they need to do with the product. And just talk to any 16-year-old kid who enjoys computer science, and he'll explain it to you better than I can. Because software is really a form of expression. In the same way that I don't know much Albanian, I may not know much Java or C programming. But you go to a technical conference and those long-haired, geeky Birkenstock wearers that I was referring to, you can hang out with them and drink a few beer, and they'll tell jokes along the lines of, hey, did you hear the one that goes A equals B, close bracket, if then, and go to, and the whole room breaks up. And I'm going, I don't think so. But the point is, in the same way I don't understand Albanian, someone could tell me a good Albanian joke and I would be equally mystified. Software is a form of expression. That's the reason computer languages are called languages. But what we're allowing to have happen, or what our industry, what the software industry has been built on, this is where the frustration comes from I'm sure a lot of you guys who are responsible for computer systems, but in particular among all the system administrators, is the software industry has been built on a feudal model. It's a model where the user of the technology is completely beholden to his vendor. So people keep asking me, so wow, Red Hat's doing such cool stuff. What other industries could benefit from this open source model? And I say you got it backwards. Virtually every other industry works this way, in an open source way. If you buy your toaster at Walmart, you don't have to buy your next toaster at Walmart. If you buy your car from Thornhill Ford, is it Thornhill Ford? Anyway, it's just the big Ford dealership. You don't have to take it back there for servicing. If they don't fix that rattle you were complaining about, or if they overcharge you, or if they refuse to install that musical horn you always wanted, you can take it to any other dealer on the planet. You can try and fix it yourself. It's only in the software industry where we have the equivalent of you buy that car, but you buy it with the hood locked shut, and you allow the dealer you bought it from to retain control of the key for the hood of your car. Such that when it starts to rattle or you need something added to it, you have no choice. You have to take it back to the dealer, and he gets to tell you, that's not a rattle, that's a feature. And it's just fundamentally flawed. And it's so flawed that as we build an increasingly digital society, we're in effect allowing the highway system, better way to think of it is the legal system, the code that we're building the society on, to be opaque. We don't actually know what's going on inside the computers that we're using. Just as an example, this is somewhat off the topic, but education's been a big theme around here for the last couple of days. Virtually every single college and school president I talk to is really thrilled of their advances from a technology point of view. They're deploying, what do they call it, online education for all their students. I say, what technologies are you using? And they say, well, we're doing it all on Microsoft Windows. And they're doing it all on standard, in other words, they're shutting out everything. We're simplifying it. We're reducing costs. We're being very responsible with our funders' money because, we do it all on Windows and that simplifies life. And I'm going, how is that educating your kids? The argument sort of around standardizing on a piece of technology over which you have no control, over which your kids who are using the technology have no way to understand what's going on inside. It's a little bit like teaching people car mechanics, but not letting them look under the hood. So you learn car mechanics according to the book, but you can never look under the hood. You get inside the car, you press the accelerator, and you go, according to the book, there's a big engine under there. That's what source code does for the education of the next generation of programmers. But it's what it does for us as members of this society is, I may not understand some law that I'm being carted off to jail about, sort of smoking marijuana, but at least I can hire someone who does understand the law well enough because the law has been published. It is a public document. However, if my browser keeps crashing because I happen to be using the wrong browser according to the guy who sold me the operating system, I have no way of knowing whether my browser is crashing because of something I did or because of something the guy who wrote the operating system did to stop me from using the competitor's browser. And that's the problem with this binary-only model. So, effectively, where Red Hat's enthusiasm comes from, where our rapid growth comes from, is all of the MIS directors who are just getting so fed up with having their systems controlled by these proprietary binary-only software vendors. And it's taking us a while. So education is a big part of what we're doing. But when we start looking at what we're doing, and Mark Ewing, the other founder of Red Hat, have founded about a year ago, we started a thing called the Center for the Public Domain. And here's the issue that I think Red Hat is simply a good example of the good news is how the market can solve a societal problem. The neat thing about being a businessman, particularly being an entrepreneur in a free market society, is there is, in fact, in a free market democracy, the consumer and the citizen are the same person. So if you have a societal need, you actually can solve it, either by marching on Queen's Park and getting them to increase the education budget or get rid of the marijuana laws, or you can solve it in the marketplace, which we had a great example here of on the marijuana point. And that's really what Red Hat's addressing. So for example, as a test of this thesis, what's the biggest single US program for alleviating rural poverty since the Second World War? Of course, everyone goes around thinking of some agricultural subsidy program. It's actually Walmart. Because prior to Walmart, rural Americans paid dramatically more for their consumer goods than urban Americans did. Their cost of living, as a result, was much, much lower. There was two ways of solving this. One, you could have had Washington legislate that consumers had to, or vendors had to sell at the same price, or you get Sam Walton who says, hey, here's a societal problem that I can make a decent living solving. And that's really what Red Hat's trying to do. So to a certain extent, people keep saying, oh, when are you finally going to get Microsoft to wake up and recognize that open source is the future? And there's an element of me that goes, I'm not sure I want them to wake up and realize that open source is the future of the software technology. The longer they stay asleep, the bigger the opportunity for us at Red Hat. But when you start looking at it, what we're actually doing, what Red Hat was able to do, 1997, we won the first of 4 consecutive InfoWorld Product of the Year awards, InfoWorld being the most prestigious award sort of program in the States for technology. And that year, in 97, we actually tied. We tied with Microsoft Windows NT. So there was Windows NT and Red Hat Linux were the winners of this award. And the people who were most shocked by this were those of us at Red Hat. Because at that time, Microsoft had put $1 billion into Windows NT development, had 1,000 of the world's smartest operating system engineers working on the project, had a 3-year head start prior to Red Hat even being founded, and the best they could do was to tie 23 kids in the tobacco fields in North Carolina. Who had rewritten the laws of economics on me when I wasn't paying attention? What it really was an illustration of was the power. What we'd actually been able to do was by using the internet as a tool, we'd been able to harness a worldwide team of engineers that was bigger than even the very biggest teams that an IBM or a Microsoft could assemble under their proprietary model where only their engineers are allowed to work on their technology. So you start looking at this and saying, whoa, that's really weird, until you stop and go, no, it's not. That's how the Western democracies, that's how Western scientific tradition works. Newton understood this one full well. He's the guy who's credited with the quote that, when someone said, boy, calculus, you must be really smart. And he says, well, not really. I just had the opportunity to stand on the shoulders of giants. That's what we do. We recycle knowledge. We build on what went before. So here's the issue, on intellectual property, that this center that we funded is really trying to address. And the center is simply centerpdpublicdomain.org. And I'm looking for your help on this. So anyone who sort of has any interest in helping, please let me know. And I'm just Bob at centerpd.org. And here's the issue, is intellectual property has come to being equated with the technology industries, i.e., the more intellectual property, the better the technology industry in your jurisdiction works. The problem is that our legislators have missed a key point about what intellectual property is and is not. The first key thing to understand is intellectual property is not property. The intellectual property is simply a set of rules, patents and copyrights, that were originally designed to reward innovators. They were designed to reward Sonny Bono for composing I Got You, Babe. And originally it was for 20 years, so he could make money off of I Got You Babe for 20 years, so he'd write the next song. Sonny Bono, how many of you guys paid any attention to this? Prior to sort of running into a tree, got himself elected to Congress. And most people who know Sonny Bono got elected to Congress just thought that he was sort of out of work and he did it to get a paycheck. He actually had a mission. He had a purpose in Congress, and his was that he thought copyright should be indefinite. In other words, why can't he pass his song, I Got You Babe, down to his children and his children's children the way a carpenter could pass a chair? And when you start studying this stuff, it gets really neat because you actually get into the debates between, and I'm not an academic, I'm a small businessman who has the opportunity to look at this stuff. But you start studying, Jefferson and Franklin debating with Adams and Madison over whether the US should have a patent office. Jefferson and Franklin's original position is they should not, because ideas, knowledge, is the core foundation of raising the skill set, the economic health, and just generally the moral fiber, or however you want to define it, of our society. They eventually agreed on the condition that the patent office would only award patents on inventions. And of course, again, our legislators have lost sight of that. Now they're awarding patents on forms of expression, on business methods, on one-click shopping. They are awarding patents on broad ideas. Copyright was 20 years. In the last 30 years, no one's been paying any attention. It's suddenly 70 years plus the lifetime of the author. Okay, copyright, a concept that was designed to reward the author to produce his next work, now applies 50 years after the author's dead. I'm going, sorry, how does the incentive work again? So we're watching this happen. We're watching it happen because Disney and Sony and Viacom and all the big publishers think that this is a good thing for them. Until, of course, you get some of these guys alone and they all admit that they actually have their reservations about this rapid expansion of intellectual property rights because they understand it's a bit of a land grab. And the reason they're all grabbing the land as fast as they can is they don't want the other guy to get it. But they understand full well that there is such a thing as the public domain of knowledge. In other words, most knowledge, most stuff we know as a society is in the public space. But as we apply broader and broader intellectual property rights, we are in effect pulling huge chunks of knowledge out of the public space where people can't use it. They either aren't allowed to use it or they aren't able to use it. And it's a problem. And I like intellectual property. It's a good thing. Patents and copyrights are good things. But like any other good thing, vitamin D, too little vitamin D, you get bone diseases. Too much vitamin D will kill you. Well, too little intellectual property rights, you get, people hoarding their knowledge. Too much intellectual property rights, and you go, geez, where's the next generation of innovators? How are they going to be allowed to bring their ideas to market if the major global publishers have broad patents and copyrights over whole sectors of things that they might invent? So that's the concern of the Center for the Public Domain, and the one that I'm looking for your help on, because it's a big issue and it's a growing issue, and what we need to do is we need to turn this into the environmental movement, where prior to the development of the concept of the environment, a polluter in your neighborhood annoyed you. Once we had developed the concept of the environment, we suddenly were able to build the alliances to point out that, no, that polluter was hurting a whole bunch of people. And we don't have that right now. So we're sort of allowing intellectual property issues to keep expanding, to patent genes. Your blue eyes are now subject to some corporation's patent. You just go, this isn't right, but yet there's so little intelligent debate going on the topic. And we're looking to rope in an environmental movement type sense, the duck hunters with the bird watchers. Well, we want to rope in the journalists who don't like the idea of signing over their work for the next 100 years to their employer, with the software developers who don't want to find that they develop a new piece of technology to solve a particular problem, only to find out that the very idea of solving that problem has been patented by some megacorp, and instead of serving their customers, they're fighting some law firm. That's my thought for today. Thank you, Melissa.